a lot of our storyboard artists came from the comics world and the zines world. So, JJ would find folks either online or at comic conventions or that sort of stuff, and like, oh, I really like your stuff. You want to come and work for me? And so it would be my job to take their boards and to make them animation shipping ready because, we would ship all our stuff overseas to be animated and to, help people, get their boards across the finish line.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Regular Show Wiki's 15th anniversary interviews. Today's guest was a storyboard revisionist for over 200 episodes of the series, as well as a former storyboard artist boarding the episodes Free Cake, The Unicorns Have Got to Go, and Appreciation Day. Please welcome Paul Scarlata.
Hi, everybody.
We'll start from the beginning. What made you initially want to work in animation?
Well, I grew up watching animation ever since I can remember. Saturday morning cartoons and after school cartoons, and um, I've been drawing ever since I could remember. And did that all through school and throughout high school, and half-heartedly applied to art schools when I was going to college. My first year of college, I was a biochem major because I didn't get into the art schools that I wanted, and I like science as well. And then thought I might really regret it if I didn't try it again. So reapplied, got in to an art school, and knew I either wanted to do comics or animation. Um, and at the end of my time at school, at art school, I was like, well, it seems like a more financially viable direction to go into animation rather than the comics. But yeah, been lucky to be doing it for the past 29 years.
So, how did you first get into the industry then?
So after I got out of school, I decided to, and this was 95, I decided to work crappy part-time jobs, save some money so that I can move out to Los Angeles. So in January of the following year in 96, packed up my car, hit the road, and drove out to Los Angeles. I was in Boston at the time. So I drove across the country and slept on a friend's couch in his dorm room, or actually his spare bed in his dorm room, for 3 months. Applying to jobs, trying to meet people, trying to hustle. Um, and then out of the blue, my cousin called me, and her husband was just starting a new show. He was working on The Simpsons, and they were starting a new show, which ended up being King of the Hill. And she said, my husband's best friend from high school is doing this thing. Why don't you give him a call? Give him a call, and he was really nice. He said, well, I'm on the writing and producing side, but I'll introduce you to the people on the animation side. And at the time, animation was booming. There was more jobs than there were people. Um, so I just got in at a very good time, as opposed to right now. Things are kind of not great right now in the animation industry, but back then it was a good time to get in, and yeah, just got lucky, and that a family friend could help me out.
So, how did all that kind of lead up to you working on Regular Show?
So most of my career has been in primetime comedy, starting with King of the Hill. Worked on King of the Hill for 7 or 8 seasons, and then after that worked on Family Guy and American Dad. For Family Guy for 1 season, and then American Dad for about 3 seasons. And then there was the last writer's strike, which happened in about 2008, and that put us all out of work for a little while. And I was also burnt out. Like the storyboarding on those Fox shows was a little bit grueling, or at least I found it to be kind of grueling. So I was like, I need to take a break anyway. And the last year that I was at American Dad, a friend of mine who I worked with, who went to Cal Arts, he came to me and he said, "Oh, I got this DVD of the producer show, and the producer show is like kind of the all the student films at the end of the year for Cal Arts." And he's like, "There's this one thing. It's so fucking funny. You got to watch it." And it was 2 in the AM PM, and we both thought it was hilarious, and then it was great, really, really funny. And I was like, oh man, anything that this guy does, I would love to be involved in. And so when I was on, out of work during the writer's strike, I decided not to return to American Dad when it started back up, and I started applying at other places, and eventually heard that JG was starting this new show at Cartoon Network. And I'm like, oh man, I gotta. Even though I was burnt out on applying for jobs because you have to take these tests that take a lot of time, and I had taken about a dozen tests and nothing was working out. I was like, I gotta try on this show. Um, and so was lucky enough to get my hands on a test and was able to do a test that they ended up liking. So got very lucky.
And so, of course, you started off boarding a few episodes, and your boarding partner was Kat Morris. So, how was it working with her in a collaborative way for the 3 episodes which you did?
It was great. I had a really great time with Kat. She's really funny, very, very, very talented. She was brand new. Like it was her first real animation job out of school. As far as I know, I'm pretty sure it was her first job after leaving SVA. And we got along great. We had a really good time. And yeah, she's very, very talented. So we had a lot of fun collaborating.
The first episode which released that you worked on, not necessarily the first one you worked on, was Free Cake. Have you got any favourite moments or jokes from this episode which kind of still stick with you today?
There are a few. Some that involve the behind the scenes stuff, and others that involve stuff that ended up on the screen afterwards. One of my favorite moments in Free Cake, which happened after sometimes rewrites will happen after it's out of our hands. Uh, where they're all at Skip's house, and the lights go out, and you hear Muscle Man take off his pants like woo, you know. Skip's gonna be totally surprised when he comes in, finds us totally naked. It's not that kind of party, Muscle Man. Ugh, don't turn on the lights. That's one of my favorite jokes that I had nothing to do with, and I don't know if Kat. I want to say that was a Mike Roth or a JG joke.
Hit the lights. It's almost 8 p.m. Woo! Skips is gonna be so surprised when he comes in and sees us totally naked. It's not that kind of party, Muscle Man. Oh, don't turn on the lights.
So Kat and I would do our pass on things, and then we would pitch, and then we would have jam sessions sometimes with me and Kat and JG and Mike. And some of my most memorable moments from working on that were just off the cuff things. Like what if the guy comes in, his name's Gary. Well, we just call him Gary. And what if I think it'd be really funny if he drove an El Camino, so it was like those kind of little off the cuff moments in creating the character and the episode um, that stick out to me for that one, and then became a running thing throughout the rest of the series. So those little moments of off the cuff, just us trying to entertain each other and laughing and just coming up with silly stuff ended up in these episodes and being a big part of the show.
So, what you're saying is basically you are kind of one of the co-creators of Gary.
I don't know if I would go that far because I mean, I was involved in those scenes and and I took the first pass on all that sort of stuff. But I remember in one of those jam sessions, Mike Roth had just like a little post-it note, and he just did the little doodle of Gary that was like David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust kind of character, and it was just this off-the-cuff, hilarious sketch. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's Gary. Um, yeah. I was involved in the creation of the character, but I think that Mike and JG definitely had more input in terms of what he ended up finally being.
And on the topic of free cake, this is a very bizarre question I'm about to ask, but if you've got a favorite type of cake?
Well, for me personally, to be honest with you, I have a lot of food allergies and I can't eat cake anymore.
Awkward.
But when I could eat cake, I was very fond of like German chocolate with a coconut flavor. So if I could have cake, that would be my favorite kind of cake.
So we'll move on to the next episode to come out, which I believe this might have been your first one that you did, the unicorns.
Yes.
I'll ask the same question for that. Have you got a favorite moment or a favorite joke or anything?
Um, I just really love just the oh dude, can I bummer spray, dude? Like the unicorns just loving this body spray. I just found hilarious. Um, but I also remember all the little moments along the way where we're like, oh, just draw, what you think these unicorns look like. So, there was the punk unicorn, there was the Clockwork Orange unicorn, there was the all the different kind of designs and having fun with that sort of stuff. And so yeah, the actual episode in my mind is all interwoven with the behind the scenes of the making of the thing. So yeah, that one, and it was also my, like you were saying, it was my first episode working on regular show, so we were really kind of discovering the tone of the show and the look of the show, and I was also kind of I was one of the older guys on the crew. It was a fairly young crew, as most of Cartoon Network in general is kind of a young studio. So I had had a lot of working experience work on different kind of shows. And also the Cartoon Network model was very different too, because we were involved in the writing, and we were, we had to pitch our writing, and so that whole model was different. So it was a huge learning experience for me, learning how they did it at Cartoon Network, how we were going to do it on regular show, and how JG and Mike liked to operate things.
And of course, you mentioned that one of the unicorns is quite literally cosplaying, if you will, Alex from A Clockwork Orange.
Yes, yes.
Were there any other sort of pop culture references which you tried to get into there?
I do remember that I was the one who drew Alex the Droog as a unicorn. I was trying to put like Sex Pistols, anarchist stuff, and the spiky, the hair and stuff, nipple rings. Well, I really like, and this was more of a JG thing. But the video game console that they play is an old Sega Master System, which I had as a kid. And so I actually had a Sega Master System um, in a box, that I kept from the old days, and that I brought into the studio, and would use as a model for when I was drawing, the Sega, and then there was stuff like the Format Wars, which I appreciated. Um, some of the old video game graphics, like in uh, Dig Champs for I think it was Death Punchies. I think had Dig Champs. So yeah, I channeled some of that. That old early Atari 2600 graphics for that sort of stuff.
Dude, these are probably the best graphics I've ever seen in my life.
Dude, it looks just like the cover. Oh, man.
Yeah, I seem to remember with that one specifically, there was somebody on YouTube had taken part of that scene but replaced all the Dig Champ stuff with Minecraft.
I haven't seen it, but I can see how that would totally fit.
The other episode which you boarded is actually personally one of the most nostalgic episodes for me.
Oh, okay.
Appreciation Day. But yeah, so any more favorite moments specifically tied to this episode?
I really liked when the snowstorm came in. I had a lot of fun drawing all of that stuff. Both just drawing the snow blizzard stuff, and then the snow plow, and then the snow monster, and them driving through on the cart, and hitting skips and stuff. I really enjoyed all that stuff. And Appreciation Day, talking about behind the scenes stuff, was the first episode that I worked with Chris Riccardi. And He was such an amazing talent and a really nice guy, rest his soul. Um, but yeah, that was the first time I, worked with him. And especially towards the end of the episode, we were like, oh, this really needs some work. We need to kind of, you know, rework some of this stuff. And that's when Chris kind of came in and helped us reboard some of that stuff. And that was kind of the beginning of my transition from storyboarding into my revision role because we had already done our first pass and done our boards and everything. And then Chris kind of came in and helped us tie everything up at the end. And yeah, working with him and seeing him work and having been a fan of his work and his Ren and Stimpy stuff, and was a real treat.
One thing from the episode that's always stuck to me is like, oh, I wish that this was a thing that happened, but it never came to be, was if there was a real life version of the Book of Park Records.
Yeah,
I always thought that would be a fun idea for a book.
yeah, maybe the push for the reboot, they'll be wanting to make some merch, and I think that would be a great idea.
Now that it's out there, I want a brief mention at the beginning for the idea.
Yeah, inspired by.
You don't need to pay me. Just put my name at the beginning. So we'll get onto your work as a revisionist in a moment. But of course, many things in regular show have to get cut out for time or standards and practices coming in. Was there anything which you remember putting in these episodes which never made it to the final episode?
I don't think so, to be honest with you, because especially the first 2 or 3 seasons, we really pushed and really got away with quite a bit more than I ever expected us to. Like I know that they went back and they did soften some of the language after the fact. Like if you watch the stuff on streaming services now, some of the stuff like them I don't know if they still call each other holes or whatever, like some of the language that we used got softened a little bit. But we really kind of like said, like, why don't we push this and see if they go for it? And we can always, pull it back a little bit. And oftentimes they did. They did go for it. Although now that you're mentioning it, I do remember something at the time was when the unicorns hand Mordecai the chalice, the sparkling chalice. It used to be, we did try to say it's definitely not unicorn piss, and they changed it to unicorn slop. Uh, so we tried to get piss in there, and that definitely didn't fly.
But first you have to drink from the cup of knowledge.
Oh, sick! What was that?
It's definitely not unicorn slump.
Well, we'll move on to your role as a storyboard revisionist. Do you remember which episode was the first one you did revisions for?
I don't, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think it was Party Pete. It might have been Hello Governor or Death Punchies. Actually, it might have been Death Punchies. I think that might have been because Chris was still working with us. Like he worked for like maybe for half of the first season and maybe the first half of the second season. He was only with us for a limited amount of time. And I remember cleaning up a lot of his rough thumbs as a revisionist. So I want to say it was Death Punches was the first thing that I worked on as a revisionist. Yeah, that whole the musical montage where Rigby is cutting the shorts and trying to get his death punch powers. That was all thumbnailed by Chris, and I did the cleanup pass for that.
So what did your role, for anybody out there who's unaware, what does the role of being a storyboard revisionist consist of?
You're kind of support staff for the storyboard artists. So and also because like I was saying, it was mostly a fairly young crew. So a lot of folks with not a lot of experience in animation, and also a lot of our storyboard artists came from the comics world and the zines world. So, JG would find folks either online or at comic conventions or that sort of stuff, and like, oh, I really like your stuff. You want to come and work for me? And so it would be my job to take their boards and to make them animation shipping ready because we would ship all our stuff overseas to be animated, or even for the timer. So I would make clean up the boards, or if they ran out of time, or if they needed help finishing some stuff, or if JG would say, okay, this section needs a lot of attention. I really want you to kind of give this section some extra love, or uh, vehicles and crowd scenes. Nobody liked doing vehicles or crowd scenes, so that ended up being a lot of the stuff that I would end up having to do. Um, but yeah, it's mostly a support role, to help make things pretty, make them shipping ready, and to help people get their boards across the finish line.
You just mentioned about crowd scenes. One of my favorite, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, but I just think it's so funny, is in the season 4 episode Carter and Briggs. There's a close-up shot of a crowd, but none of them have any detail on them at all. Like they might have just like a bunch of like these floating heads, and it just always made me laugh because it's like a close-up shot of them.
Yeah, yeah. I don't remember that exact shot, but that's often what I would get. I would get like, lollipop heads or, little smiley faces. And then, you know, um, we had a giant model pack just full of incidental random background characters. And like, oh, put this guy here and this guy there and that girl there. Um, so maybe either it didn't make it to me, or they were just like, I think it'd be funny if we just but I don't honestly remember the what the final ended up looking like on that one. That's funny.
Have you got any favorite memories from just working on the show as a whole?
My favorite memories were those jam sessions like I was talking about before, like when we were sitting down and we just kind of were sitting around a table and doodling and coming up with funny stuff. And in the beginning, in like at least the first season, it might have been the first couple seasons, the storyboard artists were involved in the creation of well, we're involved in the writing process. So what we would do would be we would sit around a big table, all JG and Mike and all the storyboard artists, and we had two staff writers. So we would all sit around a table, and we would take 8.5 by 14-inch paper. We would fold it up into four horizontal columns, and either we would say, okay, for the first 5 minutes, you draw Mordecai and Rigby doing anything you want on the top. Or there would be a prompt in a hat, like they would say, like an emotion like anger or Schadenfreude or whatever it was. And so you would pick something out of the hat and like, okay, based on that prompt, draw Mordecai and Rigby. And then 5 minutes later, like, okay, pass yours two people to your left. And so based on that drawing, okay, now for 5 minutes you write act one. And so you just write out, the setup of the story, the setup of the conflict, and then okay, now pass it three people to your right. And you would have to write act two. And then, act three. And at the end, we would read all the stuff and show the drawings and stuff. And those sessions were always a lot of fun. I think that was probably the highlight for me, just being involved in that process and seeing how all that worked and jamming with everybody and seeing where the nuggets of an entire show idea would come from. um I think that was probably, for me at least, the creative highlight of working on the show, and just working with such talented, funny people. It was a real honor. Another highlight was getting to sometimes see voice actors coming in and doing voice acting for the show. Getting to see Mark Hamill was super cool for me, having grown up on Star Wars. And Um, I regret to this day not actually having a conversation with him because he was a really nice guy. I remember one time I was in one of the stairwells and just talking with a friend, and this was right before the prequels started coming out, so it was episode 7 or whatever it was, and Mark Hamill comes through the door and starts walking down the stairs, and I had never seen him with a beard, but he had the beard, and I was like, oh, he's getting ready to be Luke again. And I just thought that was really, really cool. Um, yeah, and the first time that I ever saw him, I don't know if you've heard me tell this story before. It was in season 1, and we were having a potluck party, and we were all hanging out. And like I had said before, it was a really young crew, so it was a lot of young folks. And so I look over, and I see this guy from behind, and I was like, "Oh, who's the old guy?" Not that he was old, but he was older than most of the rest of the crew, and I had never seen him before. And then he turns around, it was Mark Hamill. I was like, oh, holy shit, Luke Skywalker. Oh my God. That was a really cool moment.
I don't know, this makes me seem like extremely young. I think just because of regular show, everybody like always will recognize Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker or the Joker. Um, but for me, it's always going to be Skips. Um, and so when The Force Awakens came out and he shows up at the end, I was just like, it's Skips.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's got this whole other separate career just doing voice acting, which is really cool. And yeah, and I will ever forever think of him as Skips as well. Even when I see him on online on social media, like on Twitter, X, or wherever, or I was like, I always think of him as Skips.
So you said those are your favorite memories of working on the show. Kind of specifically in a way for the episodes which you boarded, but also could be for things that you were a revisionist for. Was there anything personal from your own life that you put into anything?
None that I can really think of offhand. I mean, I remember I was a new father. Like my son was born literally a month after I started working on the show. And I knew that, obviously I knew he was coming. And, any other time I might have wanted to take paternity leave, but I'd been out of work for a little while. It was this new exciting show that I couldn't say no to. Um, so I remember during Free Cake, when the giant babies, I was thinking about my son who was a newborn, drawing, channeling my visions of him into those babies. Um, and I do remember sticking myself and some of my friends in the crowd scenes too, or at least versions of us in the crowd scenes. Just I can't even think of specific places or episodes where I did that, but because a lot of times in those crowd scenes, you're able to tell like these tiny little stories, whether it's some guy's picking his nose, or some girl is giving the guy a side eye, or those little micro stories you can kind of sneak in there. And I remember doing little stuff like that with myself and my friends.
I'll have to go through every episode and just like pause at every crowd scene and be like, right, is Paul in any of these scenes? How did obviously you've mentioned you've worked on other animated projects, you've worked on King of the Hill, Family Guy, American Dad. How did working on regular show differ from your work on those shows?
Quite a bit actually. The primetime type shows tend to be done in a very different way. There tends to be a lot of keyframing and a lot of posing. Those other shows are script driven. So we're given a script, we're giving an audio track, and we're not involved in the writing at all. And we generate our storyboards and our images based on those things. Whereas regular show and other Cartoon Network shows, like I was saying, you might be involved in the actual writing of the germs of the ideas, or you're handed like a page and a half outline, that you and your partner have to, either you have to write all the dialogue for. Maybe you're filling in some story holes or, changing little things to make the story work. So you're really involved in the writing process. Um, so that's a huge difference right off the bat right there. Um, in terms of drawing, I found that in regular show I did a lot less posing than you do in the other shows. Like in the other shows, you tend to do almost everything except for like, lip syncing and eye blinks. You'll do the head bobs, you'll do all the, you'll pose out all the steps that a character has to take to get from point A to point B. Whereas in regular show, you can have the characters on one side of the screen and just have an arrow, and the next drawing have them be on the other side of the screen, and the timer and the overseas studio is going to figure all that stuff out. So that was I did a lot less drawing, in terms of posing out the characters um, on regular show. I'm trying to think of other differences, and of course now, we're all digital. Whereas JG, even during the time that I was on regular show, things were going digital. But JG just really liked, pencil and paper and post-its. Because, during the pitching, you could take the post-its, move them around, and, uh, so we were drawing pencil and paper long after most of the rest of the industry had decided to go digital and use Storyboard Pro and Cintiqs and everything.
That's
Ah, yes,
yeah.
yeah, because I still use them in my current job, when we're jamming on pitches and thumbnails and stuff.
So for me and kind of things that I like to do, that's how regular shows kind of influenced me there. I'm like, yeah, use post-its because they're really convenient as well.
Yeah, yeah, and it's nice doing something tactile. I mean, you know, there are benefits, of course, to going digital. You can, resize things or, skew things or, copy and paste and enlarge and I find that when I go back to, drawing pencil on paper or pen on paper, like, oh, where's my control Z? Where's my undo? Where's my, so you have to, reset your mind to doing that.
And from what I've heard, regular show and Adventure Time were the last shows to be done with pen and paper.
Um, I want to say that for a long time, Steven Universe was doing pencil and paper too. But yeah, I don't know if they ended up going digital at some point. But yeah, I know that definitely Adventure Time, regular show, and Steven Universe, because Steven Universe was on the second floor. Uh, I'm sorry, Adventure Time was on the second floor. Steven Universe and regular show were on the third floor, at least towards the end. We started out on the first floor and moved up at some point, but yeah, so we're still using pencil and paper and light tables and electric pencil sharpeners and buzz erasers and
Have you got any favorite episodes other than the ones which you've boarded?
um I really liked Death Punchies quite a bit. I really love the Death Kwon stuff. I think that's really funny. Um I loved Cruisin' was a lot of fun to draw all those cars. I liked the Christmas special a lot, was a lot of fun. The Thanksgiving special was a lot of fun too. A lot of the early, you know, second, third season kind of stuff. I really enjoyed as much for the story as for any of the drawings. But after a little while it all starts to blur together, and it was just a lot of fun to be able to go to my job every day and just kind of, chuckle like an idiot to myself as I'm drawing these these the silly stuff and having a really good time.
And on a similar vein to that, favorite characters?
Um, I think Muscle Man is probably my favorite character. I really love Muscle Man's, he's so ridiculous and over the top and silly. And every time that I draw like a card for my son or for any of my relatives, it's always Muscle Man doing something silly or, twirling his shirt or, doing donuts in the cart. Um, I loved Skips. I loved all his lumpy shapes, so he was a lot of fun to draw. I mean, all the characters were a lot of fun to draw, and they were very different from anything that I had drawn before. All the Seth MacFarlane stuff tends to be very, three-quarter, straight and had kind of limited acting, whereas the regular show was very kind of, rubber hose drawings and very loose. And that was something that I had to get used to. It took me a while to get used to, and JG was very patient with me as I kind of adjusted to the style. But I think, yeah, Muscle Man and Skips are probably at the top of my list in terms of being my favorite to draw.
And then what would you say are your main inspirations from other media when you're working on anything?
I mean, I really enjoy. Like I grew up watching Japanese animation, when I was much younger, like early stuff like Star Blazers, which was Space Battleship Yamato, and Battle of the Planets, which is Gatchaman, and all those giant robot shows. I really love that stuff. But I also grew up on the Looney Tunes stuff as well. Um, but then when I was in college, I really got into like Akira and Ninja Scroll and Ghost in the Shell, and that era of anime. And when I came out here, that plus my love of comics and manga was really what I was hoping to get into, and just kind of fell into comedy and primetime comedy, and I've been lucky to do that. Um, but that sort of stuff really influenced my work and my drawing style. But I also really love horror and science fiction movies and filmmakers like David Fincher or Stanley Kubrick, just their scene compositions and the shot compositions and the beauty of the imagery that they make. And if you study how Fincher sets up shots and storyboards, storyboards, sequences of shots, it's storyboarding 101 mastery, so you can learn a lot from live action filmmaking and apply it to um, your animation filmmaking. And there's a lot more crossover than the live action people would like to admit in terms of the craft and the filmmaking of creating animated stuff. But I'm influenced by a lot of that stuff as well.
Have you got any advice for anyone who would want to become a storyboard artist professionally or a storyboard revisionist?
Um, well, the first advice that I can think of right now is it's rough out there right now. The animation industry and entertainment in general is in kind of a slump, and so I would say, continuing working on your skills and hang in there and take advantage of any opportunities that you can possibly get, like if there's any internships or if there's any mentorships, definitely do that because that could be a way in. I always encourage people to work on their own stuff, like put together a silly animatic and put it on YouTube or on Instagram or something. I really feel like I don't know. I am both hopeful and pessimistic about the future of animation. Like people are saying, well, things are going to pick up and we're going to get back to normal. And I'm like, I don't know that we're ever going to get back to the way that things used to be. I think that the new normal is going to be something different than the way it used to be. And I think that it behooves an artist to look out for themselves and to self-promote and to establish an online presence and get your art out there. Just make stuff and put it out there. But in terms of learning storyboarding, I would, like I was saying, study the masters like David Fincher or Stanley Kubrick, or buy or Miyazaki, or buy storyboard books by Miyazaki, or um, I always recommend. This is something that's freely available online. If you just Google it, is how to storyboard the Simpsons way. there's a little packet that whenever you were hired on The Simpsons, or even when I was hired on King of the Hill, that they handed to you, and it was like storyboarding 101. This is a close-up shot. This is a wide shot. This is a two shot. This is what is the 180 rule? The rule of thirds. Those sorts of basic core concepts. Um, is very helpful for someone just starting out. And then other than that, be willing to learn, be a team player. In animation, it's a team sport. So you're going to be working with a lot of other people. You're going to be taking direction from your director or your supervising director. Have enough ego to want to do a good job, but not so much ego that when they change everything, or if something you poured your heart and soul into gets cut, that it's not going to break your heart, because that happens. That's stuff that happens. Um, so yeah, I mean, I would basically say, yeah, basically work on your own skills, get yourself out there, establish your own voice and your own presence and your own, connect with the reasons why you want to do it. Like after a while of working in animation professionally, I found myself like, why did I get into this in the first place? I do love my job and I love, but I wanted to reconnect with that core love that drove me to want to do it in the first place. Take advantage of your opportunities, reach out to people that you admire, on LinkedIn or on social media, and say, hey, this is something I'm interested in doing. Do you mind having a conversation? And because it would be helpful for me. You would be surprised how many people would be willing to do that and to help you take your first steps or answer your questions about what it's like working in the industry.
Now, just before we start to wrap up, you mentioned a little bit then about self-promotion. Is there anything that you'd like to promote that you've been working on or that's coming up?
As a matter of fact, yes, this is perfect timing. Because I had written a young adult horror feature in my spare time a couple years ago, and I spent all of last year animating a 2-minute trailer, and I'm releasing a Kickstarter campaign to try and raise money to get this thing made. It's called the Van Helsing Society, and you can find me on social media, and I'm promoting it everywhere, and I'm just starting to do a big social media push to promote the film and the Kickstarter campaign. But people can go to the Van Helsing Society movie.com/sign up and sign up for my newsletter. And, I will be updating people about how they can follow and contribute to the campaign if they're interested. But yeah, it's something I'm very excited about, and hope to be working on. Right now it's my side hustle, and maybe hopefully someday, knock on wood, it'll be my main hustle. But yes, I'm very excited about it.
And where can people find you on social media?
So I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter X, I'm on Facebook, on YouTube. I am on Blue Sky and Cara, but I don't really update so much there. But those are the primary places you can find me, either under Paul Scarlata, Scarlata, or under the Van Helsing Society or Van Helsing Society movie.
That's great. Paul, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me on. It was great talking to you.
Thank you once again to Paul Scarlata for joining us for this interview. If you would like to donate to his film's Kickstarter, visit kickstarter.com/projects/Paul Scarlata/The Van Helsing Society movie. Next time, we will be speaking with Ellen Kramer, a comic artist who contributed to the official licensed comic series. Here's a preview.
I like to say that regular show helped me survive grad school. It was a hyperfixation that brought me some joy in a time that was very stressful. I really related with the aimlessness that Mordecai and Rigby felt in being in their early to mid 20s. But yeah, I was very annoying about this show.